Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Good Old Podcast. I'm Jackie Frenchuli for Wahoo's 24/7. As I can see, we're joined by Daily Progress's Greg Madia. Greg, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, happy to do it, Jackie. Spring football underway, so plenty to talk about.
Yeah, and we're almost at the halfway point, just about. So we've seen a couple of these guys practice already. We've talked to most of the coaches about now. I think the only ones we haven't spoken to has been Taylor Lamb, the quarterback coach, but we even talked to defensive line coach Terry Heffernan before spring. So what has been your biggest takeaway so far?
I think to go to the obvious storyline, it's seeing Mike Hollins back at practice. I think that's just incredible, right? Miraculous, however you want to term it. It's incredible to think that young man, having gone through what he's gone through, is back on the practice field and not just standing around, right? like going through drills, being part of the team. He's atop the depth chart at running back, a deep backfield for running backs coach Keith Gaither. Gaither said that he's just been so inspired by the way Hollins has returned. He said he noticed it during one of the mat drills early in winter workouts that Hollins was not only back, but back to performing where he was before suffering the gunshot wound and then the November shootings that killed three of his teammates. And because he played well in that last couple of weeks of the season. You think back at the long catch against Miami, ran the ball pretty well against Carolina, played in the Pitt game, and he kind of picked up where he left off. And that backfield's deep. I think that's the other thing with the offense that you look at is you take and you think about how they wanted to run the football last year. It didn't really pan out. They were kind of running back by committee last year. And maybe this year they're more suited to do that with the addition of Kobe Pace from Clemson, more of a big play threat than they've had in the past. Xavier Brown, another year in the system, showed some flashes last season as a freshman. Hollins back, as I talked about. And then you look at Cody Brown maybe getting back in the mix of things after not really playing much at all after transferring from Miami. And then the older guy, Paris Jones, is back too.
Yeah, that's a very deep running back room. And yeah, Mike Hollins was just an impressive young man. We spoke to him, what was it, last week? And he
Yeah.
was so open about his experience, about his thought process of just what he went through, both physically and emotionally. And what got me was all the times he kept saying that he knew he was going to play football. The hardest part was knowing that he couldn't change what happened. And the things that he couldn't change was what made his recovery a little longer. And he's still obviously going through that right now, but just a remarkable young man and just letting us get a glimpse of what he's been going through. So, but yeah, that running back room is certainly packed. You mentioned Cody Brown, and Coach Gaither last season said he needs to work on his conditioning, and he certainly has something that he's worked on that. We've seen that a little bit in practice, but obviously when you talk about the running back room, you have to talk about the offensive line room, and that's been the biggest thing that we've been eyeing. Obviously, we don't have Noah Josie there. He's been dealing with his back injury. He had surgery after the season, so he's not participating in spring. But Ugana Nana, until this past Tuesday when he was wearing a green jersey and he was limited, he's been rolling out in the firsts. So what's your confidence level on the O-line so far, Greg?
It's interesting because not only do they have to improve from what they were last year, that group has to adjust with the new offensive line coach. And talking with Terry Heffernan before spring practices begin, he had a great line. I thought that, like, nobody cares if you're young, nobody cares if you don't have experience, you've still got to perform. So I think it's interesting that he knows that coming in, and also that the fact that I think maybe he's a little more suited to do what Virginia wants to do on offense in the right way and the most efficient way to block it, right? He comes from an NFL background, time with the Bills, time with the Lions, over at Stanford with David Shaw, which, is more pro style and more what you think of that would be similar to what Tony Elliott and Des Kitchings want to do offensively. So I'm starting to wonder if maybe that's going to mesh and maybe that'll work a little bit better. Now, you still got to grow those young offensive linemen up, but maybe from a coaching standpoint, that's more suited to work than the past with Garrett Touche, where he was coming off the air raid system, having to learn what Tony and Dez want to do. Not saying that, that Tujay wasn't great, right? He built great offensive lines at Virginia before departing and before this past season. But maybe Heffernan, because of what Tony and Dez's backgrounds are, is better suited for it. So I think that's interesting. I think even Xavier Brown said he's noticed the difference in the way the offensive line is blocking for in front of him. And I think that's a positive sign. Now, you got to go out and do it on Saturdays in the fall. And I think that'll be the biggest proving ground. But until then, you want to see the progress. You want to hear about the progress that group can make under Heffernan in year one with him.
Yeah, and we'll be talking to Heffernan and the lineman on Monday next week. So we'll see his assessment of his group. But what I've noticed that at Pro Day, he was really comfortable with the NFL Pro Scouts. Obviously, he probably knows a lot of them.
Yeah.
And when you talk to recruits, those three little letters, NFL, is going to resonate with them. And it did resonate with one. They were able to pack up a grad transfer in Brian Stevens, the Dayton offensive guard, who was ranked one of the best offensive guards according to PFF on an FCS. So they already got one lineman. I imagine they're going to try to recruit at least two more in the transfer portal. But one thing they did do in a transfer portal in the offseason was add Tony Muskett. So now we're keeping an eye on him and Jay Wolfick. And you also are really close to the baseball program. You're covering them pretty extensively. So what do you think of this balance? You know, when I saw Tony Muskett in the last practice, but I mean, he has an arm. It was quite a cannon arm. First touchdown out of scrimmage. It was a touchdown pass to Malik Washington. What's your take on this quarterback battle?
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's not the conventional quarterback battle, right? You got two guys with two very different backgrounds. Muskett making the jump from the FCS level at Monmouth, and then Jay Woolfolk, who is balancing baseball and football, and not just balancing baseball and football, balancing being the top relief option for the Cavaliers' baseball program, which is up to number 5 nationally. They're 23-2 after beating Old Dominion on Tuesday. And vying for the top quarterback job on the football side. So it really is a tremendous balancing act he's trying to do. And talking with some of the baseball folks and hearing what Tony Elliott also has to say about it on the football side, you can tell how the two staffs, I think this is the most fascinating part of all of it, are collaborating and working together in order to help Woolfolk and allow him to pursue his dreams, basically, of doing both at a high level. The baseball folks need him. There's no doubt about it. He, like I said, he's their best bullpen option. Sits 95 mile an hour plus with his fastball, can get it up to 98. And he's really good. Last year, he struck out Kevin Parado, who was a first-round draft choice out of Georgia Tech for the New York Mets when the two teams played in Charlottesville. This year, he might be better than he was last year, Woolfolk. So it's tough, but what they're doing is on the football side is making the throws that he has during football practice, and his football practice availability depends on what baseball needs. They're making the most of his football throws. Like Tony Elliott had said last week on Tuesday and Thursday, he was at about 40 throws in those practices, but all those throws were in competitive drills, right? Competitive situations. That's probably what the team setting 7-on-7. If you think about how practices are structured. So they're trying to get the most evaluating circumstance that they can have with Woolfolk on the football side to give him a fair shot against Tony Muskett, who has played a ton, all right, in his career, was an all Big South choice a couple of times at Monmouth before Monmouth transitioned into the CAA. So this is the second straight season. I guess Muskett is making a little bit of a jump, right? The CAA is one of the better leagues in the FCS level. The Big South probably a couple of ticks down from that. So he had to make that jump last year. Now he's making the jump to the FBS level in the ACC, which is another jump.
Yeah, and just so people understand the balancing act that Wolfick and Tony Elliott and Brian Connor are doing here is on Tuesday's practice, he was watching as Antti Calandrea worked with the second team reps. So there's sometimes where he can't participate. Sometimes even during some of these warm-up throws, he's just doing the hand motion rather than throwing the ball. So that's what they're trying to navigate. It's definitely a unique situation. So, and we're going to move away from the offense here, Greg, because we talked about some of the key storylines on the offense. On defense, I think it's the secondary, and at linebacker, that's what we're looking at, especially at corner. They're thin a little bit at corner with obviously Anthony Johnson gone to the NFL and Ventrell Cypress going to Florida State. And obviously at linebacker, they're missing Nick Jackson. So they're looking for those leaders. And I mean, when you think of leaders, you think of Nick Jackson, just the way he led that team last year, and the vocal personality that was and still is Anthony Johnson, who is still at practices, by the way. He's still there, pretty vocal. What has been your impression on that side of the ball? And who do you feel like is the guys for us to watch as this spring practice goes on and we look toward to the spring game?
Yeah, Jackie, I think that part, the leadership aspect, is fascinating because when you ask defensive players, are you worried about having to replace AJ and Nick? Are you worried about having enough defensive leaders to make that unit work and improve off of the strides they made in 2022? The answer is no, right? They feel like they have enough leadership defensively between all that they return on the defensive line with Cam Butler and Aaron Famui and Paul Akiri and Ben Smiley and Jameer Carter, right? The list kind of goes on and on up front. And then at safety with Clary and Cohen King, who slid over to corner actually, as well as Jonas Sanker and Lex Long. Like there are enough guys who have played significant amount of snaps that they feel like from a leadership standpoint, they'll be okay. Some of those guys adjusting to those roles. Cam Butler had said like he's getting used to being the one that everybody looks to on defense a little bit. Cohen King taking some of the younger players under his wing after practice is what he said he noticed. So I think from a leadership standpoint, they'll be okay. I think probably, Jackie, the bigger concern is the production on the field with Johnson and Jackson in terms of the personnel, because Anthony Johnson was an all ACC first team corner. He's going to be drafted next month. Had a good week at the Senior Bowl, capped by a touchdown in the game. Was at the NFL Combine. Had a good pro day. Has a meeting already set up with the Miami Dolphins for a local visit. And then with Nick Jackson, you're losing a linebacker that had 3 straight 100 tackle seasons. So that's a lot of production to replace. They're probably, I don't know how you feel, better suited at linebacker than they are at corner. I think probably at corner, Tavon Kyle will be one of the starters. Who knows if Cohen King will stay there or if he'll slide back to safety. But either way, they probably need another corner or two out of the portal, I would think.
Yeah, actually, Cox mentioned that they're going to try to get another transfer portal cornerback if possible in the spring. Obviously, the transfer portal reopens in a couple of weeks here after the spring games occur. And on Tuesday, Cohen King was back with the safeties, and William Simpkins was running with the ones at corner. And obviously, Elijah Gaines, he's not practicing. He's limited in the spring. So you also have other options there. But again, they don't have that much experience depth at corner. So that's obviously an area where they know, obviously, they attack the portal pretty fiercely to try to gain experience at corner, and they're able to get Tavon Kyle. So that's certainly one area where they need to possibly get another one, like Coach Cox said during his interview. But also at linebacker, they mentioned maybe moving Lex Long a little closer to the box if they realize that they need more depth at that position. But right now, it seems like obviously James Jackson has been getting reps. The one, Stevie Bracey, another Atlanta native who almost plays exactly like Nick Jackson. When you look at him, it's kind of like a Nick Jackson copy with a little more attitude. Stevie Bracey is a pretty fun guy. He actually reminds me of Anthony Johnson's personality, so maybe it's kind of fitting there. And then another guy that is getting some traction is Trey McDonald, who is a second year in this team. So that could be possibly someone that gains more with Hunter Stewart moving to defensive end. That's obviously something that we're going to keep an eye on, how the linebacker room. And if Lex Long, who they have a lot of depth at safety, maybe he can move inside. He does have that body and physicality that requires for backers. So Greg, as we look forward to April 15th, the spring game, we finally have more numbers at O-line where we don't have to have them both on both teams this year. What are you looking forward to the most?
I think you just want to see how the offense functions, right? Beyond the offensive line issues Virginia had a season ago, is the offense overall had issues, right? I mean, they had quarterback problems. Brandon Armstrong's interceptions were way up from what it was the year before. Running game, really failed to get going as Virginia wanted it to get going. So you want to see how the offense functions as a whole and what adjustments from last season has the coaching staff made offensively. Are they limiting the playbook a little bit to make sure that the basics are understood. You've heard Tony Elliott say it a couple of times that he was maybe a little overzealous last year in everything he wanted to implement, from his culture to some of the things they were doing offensively. You've heard a couple of players say there's been more buy-in and more understanding and willingness to learn and listen to Tony Elliott this year than there was last year. Does it translate to a better looking product offensively? You wonder that. And kind of along those lines, right? Offensively, we talked about the running backs, the quarterbacks, the offensive line. They have a whole new quartet of receivers, right? Between J.R. Wilson, Malachi Fields, Malik Washington from Northwestern, and Demeek Starling. It's a new look wide receiver group. I know some of those guys played late in the season last year when Keaton Thompson and Dontavian Wicks were banged up, but they're still not. They're still going to be in a magnified role, it seems like, for the first time in their career. So I think you just want to see how the offense functions overall, and if they can be a better unit than it was in 2022.
No, that's for sure. And yeah, there's a lot of guys saying there's more buy-in. Even Tony Elliott mentioned that there's a little bit more buy-in, and they're not throwing so much at them. And I've seen from practice is it seems like they're enjoying playing football again. That's been something that players have said, that they're just having fun again. And I think that's something that stands out to me as well when you're watching them play out there, and they're more comfortable. This is their second spring with this coaching staff, so they all understand each other a little bit more. So they know where to need to go. That's something that in your first spring, even first fall camp, you're still trying to figure out each other out. And it seems like there's a little bit more camaraderie and more understanding between both sides as they go to this spring game. So my last question before I let you go, Greg, which player are you looking forward to seeing the most live on that spring game?
Ooh, that's a good question. I like that question. I think it's probably got to be the quarterback, right? I think you want to see Tony Muskett. I see Woolfolk on on the baseball side a good bit. Uh, I don't know if he'll participate in a spring game, right? Baseball plays at home that weekend against Pittsburgh, so who knows what Woolfolk's baseball football split will be that weekend. But I think you want to see how the quarterback does when the bullets start flying, and there's competition. There's that competition aspect beyond the practice field with nobody watching, right? You want to see that. So I think that's exciting on the offensive side. And then on the defensive side, I look at that D line. And if you're a Virginia fan and you're not excited about that D line, that's something to get excited about, because a lot of programs in college football would really love to have that experience, that depth on the defensive line. That's a luxury Virginia has that not a lot of other programs can boast.
Yeah, when you see like Chico Bennett not playing in the spring game because obviously not been limited this spring, and
Right.
they still are able to go two deep, very talented teams in the spring. It's nice to be Virginia when it comes to that defensive line. And I agree with you. Everyone's going to be wanting to see Tony Muskett live and Jay Wolfick live under center. I mean, if there's no NIL deals with T-shirts saying "Fire the Musket" by the time the end of spring game, I'll be very disappointed in this UVA fan base, to be honest.
I was gonna say
But I'm going to be kind
whoever
of
wins that quarterback job is gonna be set up for some great NIL deals, whether it's Musket or Woolfolk, given the two sports stuff.
Oh yeah, no, I still remember that ESPN magazine cover that they put up on Twitter, on the Twitter account. That was very smart by
The Bo
UVA
Jackson,
Twitter.
yeah.
Yeah, that was very, very smart. But I'm gonna agree with you that I do like the quarterback battle. That I want to see how that goes live, but I also want to see the center position. Ty Furnish and Dawson Alters are the two that have been rotating between first and second reps. Justice Johnson's actually moved to guard, from what we can tell, and during practice. Obviously, this is just all spring, and they're going to have Noah Josie back and all that stuff. So I'm curious, that center position, that's always been something that we've been keeping an eye on last season. And on defense, I want to see what the lineup at safety will look like. But I'm really curious to see the corner positions. But I'm actually really curious to see how Cam Kelly and Antonio Clary work together. I think Antonio Clary last year was with his injuries, we didn't see the full potential that he could. But I think Antonio Clary's speed and physicality, and he looks a little trimmer too. I think he's going to be one to watch out for in that safety. I think he's going to raise his stock tremendously for the NFL this season. So those are the players that I'm keeping an eye on. So, but Greg, I really appreciate you joining the show today.
Yeah, happy to do it, Jackie. No problem.
And thanks again for Greg for joining us on the show. It's always great to hear his thoughts on UVA football and obviously UVA athletics. And obviously, you can follow what Greg writes also on the Daily Progress. So, before we let y'all go, obviously, we mentioned a little bit of Virginia's latest commit and Dayton transfer, Brian Stevens. And as I mentioned, he was a pretty big get for UVA. I know a lot of people are going to be stuck on his Power Five offers, but Stevens, if you look at what he's been able to accomplish at the FCS level, Pro Football Focus ranks him one of the best offensive guards and honestly, one of the best offensive linemen, period, in the FCS. So that's a good pickup for Virginia. They need experience, and he obviously has that, and they need bodies at the O line. So this is a good get for Virginia. Now they're going to be trying to get two more because you remember Tony Elliott says they would like to have about 15. With Brian Stevens on board, they would have 13 scholarship offensive linemen on that roster. So there was likely they would try to get at least two more. Virginia is in communication. I had a source say they're having communication with at least two more in the portal at the current time. And they're likely going to be evaluating other guys. As I said, the portal opens in just a few weeks. So expect more crazy pandemonium mayhem from the transfer portal. And they will likely get at least one cornerback as well to help with that experience depth that they need at that position. So again, they're going to be evaluating guys if they enter in the portal. Now, I have not heard this, but looking at who they have at wide receiver, it wouldn't shock me if they tried to get one more wide receiver, but I think their priority is going to be obviously O-line and corner, and then it happens to have an additional wide receiver that they seem to have like in the transfer portal. That would be someone that they might go look after. And they haven't, according to sources, they wanted a wide receiver back in December. They wanted to add at least one more wide receiver after Malik Washington, but they're being very selective on who they get. It's not like they're going to go all out on a wide receiver. They know their priorities is O-line and cornerback. But if there's someone that they like, it's kind of like how with the situation with Kobe Pace, they weren't looking for a running back in the transfer portal, but Kobe Pace entered the portal and Tony Elliott had that connection and a relationship with him at Clemson. And that's how that relationship kind of came about. Next Tuesday, we'll have a special guest on the show. Brian Stevens, the offensive line commitment, has agreed to be on the show to talk about his decision behind committing to Virginia, but also just for us to get to know Brian Stevens. You know how I work here. I like to get to know the student athletes behind all those stats and numbers. So he'll be joining the show next Tuesday. So for right now, again, if you like what you're hearing, like the direction of the show, and you want to see this continue, go ahead and subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to your podcast, and go ahead and like this video, like this channel, and subscribe so that you can get notifications wherever we post a new episode. And honestly, we also will have Sights and Sounds back here on Monday as well, because we'll have another opportunity to see Virginia football's spring practice. So for me and Greg, I hope you guys have a good rest to your week, and we'll be right back here on Tuesday.